Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Today's topic, we are going to be tackling what medical cannabis operators need to know and how to prepare for DEA readiness. And before I dive in, I just want to share a little bit about my background. I got my start working in the Colorado cannabis industry in 2009, running and operating vertically integrated operations. And in 2015, I founded my company, ICS Consulting. And I've been helping operators navigate the regulatory landscape and hurdles for the last 11 years nationally. Let's go ahead and welcome my next guest, Alex Hdrдің. And Alex is the president and founder of Red Wolf Risk. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Jenny. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, you're my most reappearing guest on my podcast. And that's because we work a lot together on projects and we collaborate a lot. Why don't you just go ahead and give a little bit about your background before we jump into this awesome topic today?
So I've been an advocate for a long time for cannabis legalization. I got involved in the legal cannabis industry early on in 2009, was a caregiver for patients, growing product and plants for patients, and have been a part of the legal industry since then, designing, building, operating all types of facilities. Real focus on cultivation initially, but it spanned the full vertical. And I have a particular set of niches in risk management and quality management. So that's on a high level what I've been doing and who I am.
Love it. I know some of the audience members love seeing you come on the podcast. So it's always great to have you on as a guest. And today's topic is a really important one. And I do want to highlight right before we dive in here is that this is a very fast moving piece that's going on in the cannabis industry right now. We're trying to keep up and decipher, discern. There's so much information out there. First, we're going to start with the big picture before we start putting things under the microscope here. And I want to pitch this to Alex. I know we've been talking about rescheduling and federal cannabis reform for kind of a while now, and I know we've mentioned it a few times on the podcast. Where are we right now with rescheduling? Like, where do things currently stand with the whole rescheduling process, just to give people an inside look in case they haven't been paying attention or they're just trying to sift through all this crazy amount of information that's out there on the internet?
Yeah, so the point in time that we're recording this is important because, like you said, this is very fast moving. So we just wrapped up about 10 days ago the DEA hearing, and we're in a wait and hear period. The hearing actually went, I think, from my vantage point, fairly well. There was a lot of information, a lot of sides. It's a little noisy right now. We're reading the tea leaves quite a bit. So, anybody that says they know what's going on absolutely really doesn't. Basically, the hearing was set, and what they had done before the hearing is that they rescheduled from 1 to 3 all cannabis that was produced or sold through a state medical license. So even the licensees that didn't go through the DEA registration process, technically all of the medical licenses are now producing and selling Schedule 3 product. What this hearing, the purpose of the hearing was to determine if all other cannabis is Schedule 3.
Adult use, right?
Yeah, so adult use, but even outside adult use, right? People's home grows, the plant and its product, Schedule 3. So, but that would absolutely include adult use. That's the big result. That's the ruling that the judge needs to make. And so they got through it all. The DEA had some interesting people there that actually, which is bizarro world for the DEA to have people that are actually defending the medical use of cannabis, which is just unreal, which to me really defines that it should not be in Schedule 1 because that's a very clear criteria that there's no accepted medical use for, that's one of the main definitions. And so they cleared that hurdle with the DEA's first couple witnesses, which were medical experts in cannabis. So they get through it all. It was weeks. It was clandestine, really. They didn't open up much reports afterwards. So you had to hear from some people that were in the room. I was lucky enough that actually last week to hear somebody that was in the room and got some interesting insights. But now we're through it. And what the judge said, okay, now we're giving everybody another month. So I think it's the 17th of August that all of the parties that were part of the hearing get to put in their last statements, edit their comments, or whatever extra input that they need to the judge. The judge will then collect that information and he's going to make his formal ruling. And again, that ruling ultimately, should all cannabis be Schedule 3 or are we sticking with the medical licensed cannabis? It is all interesting because that ruling actually doesn't have any real impact. What will happen immediately after this, and of course there's no timeline or restrictions on the ruling, the judge, but once he makes that ruling, it's all on the DEA administrator, 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝘀𝗀, I believe is his name, and then that person, he has all the authority, and they're
We'll
going to
make the decision.
He's going to make the decision. Very likely he's going to be impacted by the judge, but it's really up to him to make that decision.
Or people around him that influence him as well.
And, the structure of the government, which, the president appointed him, and the president, has signed an executive order to expedite this rescheduling process. So you would think there's pressure on him to get this out sooner than later.
Yeah, so August 17th, the whole entire industry could completely change if they went full steam ahead with the entire plant.
Yeah.
I think it would just be a ginormous explosion in the industry if it was the entire plant.
It's going to be possibly the biggest thing to happen to cannabis. And, even if they stick with just the medical license, there's still enormous things and changes that are going to happen. I personally think I'm going for reschedule at all. I'm actually, personally want to deschedule this plant completely off the controlled substance list, but that's not where we're at now.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
But it obviously is the right thing to do to reschedule it all. And just on the law enforcement alone, to be able to discern what is Schedule 1 and Schedule 3 when it's the same plant and product seems enormously difficult for any law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
You would hope that they would make that decision.
So we're watching what's going to happen next with rescheduling. The reality is that medical cannabis operators are already having to think about the DEA. And that kind of brings us to our next section, because basically the DEA has already started showing up at cannabis operations. We heard that, a couple weeks ago?
Yeah.
And this is right out of the gate. When was that, Alex? I think it was maybe 2 months ago. We saw the DEA were hiring 5,000 agents.
Yeah.
They were absolutely getting ready.
And it was actually more than a couple months ago. I think it was somewhere around March, where the president was the end of last year, November, December, signed the executive order to expedite the process. Nothing happened for a few months. He comes back, chimes in around March or so and says, no, we're really doing this. And at that point, I know you and I both went on.
Both went to the website.
And the top line was, we're hiring 5,000 diversion experts, which
basically
doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to cannabis, but you would think that they would all potentially play that role. So they're building their bench and they're already inspecting. So they're here. The DEA is here, everybody.
Yeah, they are here, which is why we're doing this episode today.
Yes.
So my next section is I want to talk about, what does the DEA registration mean for medical cannabis operators? We're just talking about medical right now because they're the only ones that are currently getting these inspections. So from an operational standpoint, what does DEA registration actually mean for one of these medical cannabis operators?
So it means that, one, you're on the DEA list. There's a couple things here. I think some pros and cons that operators have been having to weigh. And I know legal counsel has kind of fallen on both sides of this aisle. Some have said, hold, don't be the first. Others have said, go be the first because you're going to get preferential treatment, right? And that window's already closed. That closed right before the hearing at the end of June those initial businesses that have already registered, they're in the system, and this is where the learning process happens for both the operator and the DEA. The reports from the first DEA inspection, which had to be, honestly, as an operator, one of the most terrifying experiences to have the DEA knock on your cannabis facility.
Like it would harken back to early,
Oh,
like 2010, for the first time ever, regulators coming into a cannabis facility in the United States to do a full regulatory framework inspection. Back in the days when you and I first started, this reminds me of the early days where we had
yeah,
our
absolutely.
first.
No, very comparable. When I got the cultivation license up in Leadville, and I remember going into the chief of police's office and showing them my facility and the plant. It was very surreal because that same chief of police in the same office, few years before were kicking in doors of weed grow. So yeah, I'm sure this was a very big moment for everybody involved. And honestly, not least of which the actual DEA agents, right? Because they're learning on the fly right now. And
Yeah,
the first report was they were in the first site for 6.5 hours. And
that's what I heard.
and the quote one of the DEA agents said is we're learning too. So I think if there's any advice out there is like, you know, work with these agencies. They're trying and they got to learn as well. And when I work with any type of it, give them the benefit of the doubt that their intention is right and they're trying their best. But there's a lot of implications like you're asking. I mean, basically what this means is ultimately they're going to review your inventory. There's a lot of other things that we'll go over. One of the rules that this whole rescheduling is trying to adhere to is actually there's a treaty signed, I want to say in the early 70s. It's called the Single Convention. And this is an international treaty where the U.S. basically created and told the rest of the world, you guys have to really crack down on, drug use, including cannabis. And in it, it basically says if you choose to use it in any way, make sure that the state has control over it. And so that's what is happening is now the DEA basically is going to own your product and you're going to pay them a tax and they're going to be the middleman for all of this as of now. Yeah, that's what it means.
One of my questions is, how can these medical cannabis operators navigate this regulatory rabbit hole on the DEA site, the portal and regulations, logs and forms? You and I, we were doing some deep diving this week on some of the regulatory citations, and it was just a pure rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, the advice to get ready is, this is the time where compliance really matters. Everything you've been saying for years, this is where inventory control and all those in metric states, you better get buttoned up. Make sure all your security documentation and information is there. Make sure all your state, licenses and things that you
And support, have third-party support, or
Absolutely.
work with your attorneys, work with third-party compliance experts. This is the time. I know a lot of people have not really invested. They've done in compliance internally, but I really think now is the time to really lean on people who do have
Yeah.
this compliant expertise. I feel like this is a whole other level. This is more than just the fire department or the police department coming in or the health department or your local inspection or your municipality or your state regulators. Even though the federal government's coming in right now and they're just learning, I think they're going to learn pretty quickly. And even though they're navigating, I think their learning curve is going to be, I think it's not going to be very large, to be honest. I think they're going to pick it up pretty quickly here.
Yeah, no, agreed. And really, for me, if I were giving advice, it's really focused on the inventory.
Yeah.
This is where it needs to be buttoned up, and that's where this whole federal state relationship started from, and it was the Cole memo in, 2009 or 10, that basically said to the states, go ahead and do these state licenses, but you have to control the inventory, and the big buzzwords are inversion and diversion.
Yeah.
And so those are the real potential crimes that the DEA is looking for. And so the way that you make this quick and easy is showing that you have control of your inventory.
What I'm hearing from medical cannabis operators in these states that actually are getting these inspections, that this right now is just an initial inspection where they're coming in and validating the actual registration for the people who registered. This is not a come in and hand out compliance violation inspection. But I do think once they get through this initial going in and validating everything that everybody put on their form that they filled out to make sure that it's a valid registration and that everybody's saying who they are. And I'm sure they're probably checking to make sure there's no criminal activity and that these are real professional businesses that are applying for this registration and they have to do their due diligence. And I feel like that's what they're in right now. They're in their due diligence phase, the DEA. But once they get through that process, I think here in the next probably 2 years or so in the future, we're going to see enforcement happen.
Yeah. Oh no.
We're not in the enforcement phase yet. Just when cannabis launches for the first time in a state, we don't see the enforcement phase right out of the gate. Everyone's still learning. It's brand new for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly my estimation, is that once the DEA gets their feet under them, knows, okay, this is the process. These agents, they need checklists, right? They need to know what they're checking, and they won't figure that out until they actually go through a review.
They're building their system out. They might have the foundation and a lot of systems in place for a lot of the other things that they regulate, and they come in and they know how to audit and do inspections, and they have all that down and the compliance, but they have to go in real time and create kind of their own checklist for their own auditing systems and what they're going to be putting together. But I think at this point, cannabis operators, they need to build a operation that can withstand ongoing federal scrutiny. If you did register or you decide later on when that opportunity is there to get registered, you are literally going to be under the microscope more than what everyone's going through at a state level. I kind of want to talk about the bigger operational implications, really talk about supply chain and closed system concepts. So, as cannabis moves into a federally regulated controlled substance framework, what should operators be thinking about when it comes to supply chain?
Whew, that's a big one. You need to have supplier qualifications, right? You need basic qualifications at the state level. Obviously, they're going to need a license. Two, I want to work with a business that doesn't have the right insurance coverage. So, and minimum qualifications, are they licensed? Are they covered? But also, this is where you have to check all your inputs, right? You really should be testing all your inputs. There's a lot of trust in this industry that whatever they're putting in or on these plants or products is what the label says it is. That's not always the case. There's multiple incidents of the labels being wrong and products having different set of chemicals in these products, and you're liable. Whatever you're putting on your plant you're liable for. So it's really good to double check all those inputs. Having backups too, having understanding of where supply chain issues might arise and knowing where to find additional inputs or vendors when you need it.
How could this DEA registration potentially affect the way that cannabis operators purchase, manufacture, distribute, and transfer cannabis? Because they're essentially going to be in this portal.
Yes, so this is a big one. This is where it's hard to read the tea leaves.
It is.
Excuse me. Honestly, there's pros and cons here, right? Because there's one theory out there that, you will potentially need to only work with other people within this portal.
Yeah.
Which is potentially a big concern. But there's also huge potential here for opening up the market beyond just the states that you work in. Because right now, everybody's working in these individual states. But what this could do, it could open up medical research opportunities. It could open up new drug development company opportunities. It could open up, honestly, international supply chain opportunities. So selling product to different countries and different organizations across the world. And then the big one too, potential is interstate, right? I think people are concerned, rightfully, for how's this going to restrict my market? But also the other question should be, how's it going to open it up? Right, and that's what we don't know, but there's a lot of potential there for growth opportunities for these businesses.
I would say the one thing that has never changed about the cannabis industry, I've been in it since 2009, is that we're always building the boat while ruining it. I feel like this is nothing new. I do feel like cannabis operators that registered are going to be able to step up to the plate. And I feel like a lot of operators have been through so much just to get to where they're at. And it's going to be really interesting to watch how all of this unfolds. So, as cannabis moves into a federally regulated control, this framework that we're talking about, operators need to understand how the DEA registration requirements, authorized activities, and these closed system concepts could affect who can manufacture, purchase, distribute, and transfer these controlled substances. And that's why things like QMS and GMP, if you want to talk a little bit about that, because this is really going to support all those things that we're talking about without.
So if these businesses want to take advantage of those opportunities that I just listed, medical research, new drug development companies, interstate, international commerce, the best thing these businesses could do is to prepare with quality management systems and GMP. And GMP is a big buzzword. Again, it's different industries, different countries. It means different things, but good manufacturing practices. These are best practices that obviously change, but what these opportunities will require is a foundation of a quality management system with the certain GMP requirements layered on top of that. So if your business wants to take advantage of these coming opportunities, that's what you're going to need. If you want to focus just on the state that you're in and play in that same market, these QMS and GMP requirements likely won't affect you, but different states have taken different, approaches to this. So the states may require them as well. This is the next level of maturity these businesses really need to start competing in this next chapter.
The states are sitting back and they're all having these conversations internally right now on watching to see what happens so they can make their next decision and maybe future implementations of new regulations in the state regulatory framework. We have seen states come out and say where it is mandatory to register, and these are just all medical states where I've seen it. I haven't seen it in markets that are a combo of adult use and medical, but specifically I did see it come out of Oklahoma. It's going to be interesting. We could see in the future that states come out and say, once they get more information, they can make that decision. They might come out and say every medical cannabis operator does have to participate in the registration. They might add these GMP, QMS requirements on top of it for people who are registered. Also, too, I want you to touch on the GACP a little bit for the cultivation side, because that does have to do with the agriculture.
No, I appreciate that. So GMP is going to impact extraction and manufacturing. So there's different GMP in this country. There's 3 GMPs that the FDA enforces, and it's food, and that food standard GMP will apply to food manufacturing. And then the extraction, that falls under what's called dietary supplements. And that's a little about a tier up, a little bit more criteria than food. And then the third one is pharmaceutical. And when you want to work with these big pharmas, there's the big opportunities that are coming in. If you want to work with them, depending on how you might need to be a pharmaceutical GMP compliant, which is very extensive. You're testing so much at every stage of your business. So that one's going to be the most burdensome rules and requirements. But for the GACP, it's really important because that is good agricultural and collection practices. And this is the international standard to grow a plant that will be used inside a pharmaceutical product. If you're a cultivation and you want to prepare for these new opportunities, that is going to be the standard.
Like an API.
Yeah, exactly. Active pharmaceutical ingredient. And that's all pharma is, basically, right? All big pharma produces single active ingredients, right? And so it's mostly isolates they work with. And that's where there's going to be real potential here for new drugs. And most of the drugs that are going to be produced in this new phase are going to be drugs that are going to be sold at pharmacies. So over the counter and prescription, right? And that's when you get those FDA approval of new drugs. That's where it's going to end up. You won't buy these at the dispensary. You'll buy these at the pharmacy. Yeah.
I want to jump over to the next kind of segment of this episode today. We're going to talk about DEA inspection readiness.
Yep.
And right now, we're just tackling this for medical cannabis operations. We're not really talking about what's for all the plant uses. We're just going to try to focus on the medical because we know that's what's actually happening right now in real time.
Yep.
So we just want to give some best practices and tips on how to prepare. You want to really start right now beginning to build your DEA specific readiness program. So number one, I would work on, if you are registered and you have not had your initial inspection, you want to designate your DEA visit team. You want to select who's going to be the primary DEA lead. If you have a compliance inspection at your cannabis operation, who's going to be walking with the regulators and answering the questions and being the lead in that conversation. You also want to make sure that you have a backup and alternate. You should be having these internal discussions with everybody from executive level down to managers and employees, because they could be essentially asking employees questions, and you want to make sure that everyone's prepared. You want to make sure you have a compliance lead, your advisor, legal counsel available as appropriate, and clearly defined responsibility roles for document production.
Yeah.
And then also for Alex, what happens if the DEA walks in and the person responsible for compliance isn't there? We know how the cannabis industry can be.
This is why I think one of the big challenges with the industry is that they have called it single point failure, where somebody knows all of the thing, and if that person doesn't show up to work that day, you guys are in trouble. And that's where you're just saying clearly defined document production. You should really have a process on how to produce this information, and it needs to be disseminated to the entire team. Like, everybody should be aware of this, right? This shouldn't be siloed just to the individual compliance officer or lead, even though that person should be the one that, you know, will lead the inspection and will be a part of it. Everybody needs to understand this is a new change. There's a new sheriff in town, and they're going to come in and they're going to check on some things. And like I said, you know, the good news is that a lot of what they're going to check, especially initially, is already what you're doing compliance-wise for inventory and some of the security. A lot of this is just basic compliance and best practices that businesses are already doing. It's just really about, you know, producing the right SOPs and policies and training the employees, and just so the awareness is there.
Yeah, and I would just say that everybody has really good bones right now. I think if people registered, I would think anyone who registered does not have a sloppy operation and bad record keeping. Hopefully, people who registered might need to have things tightened up a little bit, but they all have good bones. They have all the foundation there. They have all their SOPs. Everything should be reviewed and looked over, and things should get tightened up. The next piece I want to talk about is creating a dedicated DEA compliance file. And Alex, if you want to kind of dive in and share about what this compliance file would look like.
Yeah, I mean, this is where a quality management system comes in handy, because what foundationally you need in the quality management system is controlled documents, and one of the requirements there is a master document index. You really need to start controlling. I'll tell you, this is probably the hardest. It's not necessarily difficult, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to pull together. What are all of your documents? What is current? And what versions do we have? And what version went from, you know, what changed between the versions? This is the next step of maturity that I think a lot of businesses have a hard time with, because there's constantly changing, you know, rules, and they're constantly, you know, having to adapt to those new sets of rules. But this is where, you know, it's not the most attractive part of the business, but you really need control of your documents, and you really need a way to do that. There's multiple ways, there's multiple softwares, there's the old school paperwork way. You can track this, you know, through spreadsheets, but, you know, naming conventions, how do you identify what it is, who's the owner of each one of these documents? And it takes some time and thought, but it's not complex, it's just a lot of work.
Yeah, what's interesting, I'm looking at the different document categories, and you and I have been talking about this for, I don't know, 10 years, a decade, about having a regulator communication log for forever. Have a book, Have everything that you're communicating with regulators. And on our list here, we have DEA correspondence, which literally goes back to what we've been telling operators for the last decade, is having this communication log or book or binder or whatever, just tracking the conversations that you're having with regulators or these DEA agents that are coming in and doing these initial inspections. You could be breaking up your file into categories, which I highly recommend. You just don't want to dump everything into one file. You want to have it organized.
Yeah. I mean, there's different ways to do this, but you want a governance, you want to define how are you governing, and that's a lot of policies. There's a lot of compliance pieces, but how do you break up operations and departments? You can do this a lot of different ways, and honestly, what I tell most businesses is that you're already doing most of the things you need to do. You just need to document it, right? And again, that's probably the hardest part. I think one of the biggest lifts for these operators is that they know how to run this business. And in a lot of ways, they know how to run it really well, but are you documenting it? And that's where this is, once we've hit this federal level of compliance, it's a different game. And
Yeah.
It's about covering your butt, and writing the things down that you're doing and documenting it as well as you can.
Fully believe operators have the grit to go through these hoops to get there for what's next. These next pieces are really important. You have to know what you have, where it is, who owns it, and how quickly you can produce it. And I've probably been saying this for a decade, just talking about normal cannabis state inspections when they come in. And I see people struggling with this at the state level and the local level, not knowing where all their documents are at, who's in control of them, who's managing them, who's in charge of organizing everything. And so I think the first piece you said that was the most important piece was documenting everything. I say after documenting everything, the number 2 is organization.
Yeah.
Because if you're not organized, you're going to screw yourself. You're going to be shooting yourself in the foot. And the DEA, maybe in the initial visit, they're going to give everybody some grace and leeway. But essentially, when we get into the enforcement part of this, that they will only tolerate not being organized for so long.
Yeah. No, you
Just
need to
like
be
the
able to
state
produce-
regulator.
Yeah, you need to be able to produce something that they're asking for fast, and that goes to your organizational requirement is that, hey, be buttoned up because you don't want to be fumbling around.
Yeah.
Then there's different ways to keep track.
Next piece is you want to know your ownership and your corporate file and all the information that you have on there.
Yeah.
All your formation documents, operating agreements, management agreements, any kind of privilege permits, your ownership roster, any kind of ownership interest or changes, license transfers, power of attorney, and all your business history. You want to have that organized and spend time reviewing that. You want to create an at-ease inspection. And by being organized creates that at-ease inspection. It's going to make it not so stressful for you and not so stressful for the DEA agents that are coming in.
Right.
And the next piece is going to be know who has access to your facility and product. That's going to be highly important. This is going to be like your personnel who handle cannabis, the management structure, alarm access, facility access, training records, employee records, background checks, fingerprints. So if the DEA asks you who can access your controlled inventory right now, can you answer that immediately? And so access controls need to match your written procedures and actual practice. And everything has to match the information that you filled out when you went in and you applied for that DEA registration, when you filled out your form, that everything is aligning with that as well. The next thing is going to be able to explain your entire product flow, and I'll let you talk about that, Alex.
This is where you need to have a grip on your supply chain, right? And I'd like to have a full process flow of any business, right? And a vertical looks different than, a cultivator or manufacturer. But where is the product coming from, And then this can be inputs, it doesn't necessarily need to be the product, but who has the ordering decision? I like to designate a supply chain manager, right? And they have the decision to who the vendors that you're working with and who makes those orders, right? And then there's a process, okay, once you make that order, how do you receive it? Who is the person who receives it? How do you verify the manifest and the things coming in? How do you bring it over to inventory, right? To the backstock. All these things should be defined, right? Inventory, this is a big one. I mean, obviously the states have their own inventory system, metrics one. A lot of businesses have secondary tracking, and there's additional ways to track. I mean, this is bean counting, and your inventory should be able to match your virtual inventory should be able to match your actual inventory every day.
Yeah.
And so how are you reconciling that? Again, how are you storing it? Where is it being stored? Who has access to it all? And if you're a dispensary, how do you track your back stock versus your floor stock,
Yeah.
right? And how do you
Yeah.
transfer it between the two? And then, making sure that the sale is, of course, done compliantly through the state rules and regs, and that you're able to verify that. And then also, a lot of businesses, I think, forget about documenting how do you close out your business. What are the processes to secure storage, to set the alarms, the double checking of all the numbers in an inventory. So what's your closing checklist look like? Having that defined, you'll be in a good position to show that product flow to them.
And all the things that we're talking about, operators have to do already, but they're not used to having it scrutinized at this new level that we're at, right? And so I don't want people to get relaxed or complacent. We already have to do all this, but you don't have, in some states, we look at Colorado, and not every state, they are not coming through with a fine-tooth comb, and they're not spending 6-7 hours in your facility. In some states, your inspection is only an hour or 2 hours, right? We're not hearing a lot of these states spending 6 to 8 hours combing through every single thing that you're supposed to be doing in your business. And that's the level that I want people to wake up to.
Yeah.
And without a doubt that the DEAs have already reached out to Metric to learn and understand this tracking system, which, by the way, Metric is just a diversion tool for compliance tracking. That's really what it's there for. It's really not there to help you manage your inventory at all. I think you gave some good examples, and the DEA should be able to ask you to start at the front door and walk them through the entire life cycle of all your product, every decision from the time it gets tagged and leave the door. The next piece you want to make sure that you're prepared around, which we brought up a couple times, which is the inventory reconciliation, really needs to be rock solid for all the operators that don't reconcile every day. If you are DEA registered, you want to make sure you're on top of your inventory. It has to be super clean. And the next section too is your biannual inventory process. You want to make sure that you can demonstrate your physical inventory, documentation of your inventory, whether the inventory occurred before opening or closing, that's the reconciliation, and how your discrepancies are handled. They're going to be looking at all your notes in Metric, all your adjustments that happen in Metric, all the notes associated with the adjustments, all your transfers in the Metric system. And if you're not on Metric, these same areas as it relates to other inventory tracking systems. The next section that you want to be thinking about is security. It's not just about having cameras, but knowing what they're showing, what you're recording, all your retention, all the compliance information around your cameras and your security. You want to train your staff before the visit, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, Alex, how someone can prepare their staff for such a visit.
It comes down to compliance. I mean, compliance should be a major component of all of the education that you're doing anyways, and it's just re-emphasizing. I mean, every business that I've worked with, what I do is I coach them on the different agencies that matter. What do they care about? OSHA, obviously worker safety, and here's our worker safety program. Right now, what I would do, ideally these businesses are already informing them on the state rules and regulations, and I would just say, look, all these state rules and regulations as of now will be enforced by the state regulators and also the DEA. When they come in, you need to be able to show your inventory, your security, all the things that we have to do for the state. That's what the DEA is going to check initially. And that's likely going to change with additional criteria. But as of now, if you're buttoned up well at the state level, like we were saying earlier, the DEA, they're trying to figure this out. And once they understand, okay, this is what we're looking for, they could change their approach, and they likely will. But as of now, This is a learning system. And so our learning, it's a trial for them to learn all these different systems. So it's just educating them. Who are they? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? I like to inform them of what's happened at the state or at the federal
Please,
level.
yes.
Right, and I'm sure
Yes.
people are paying attention, but obviously it's confusing. Just educating your staff like you would. This is important. These are new rules or regulations that are coming in and that impact your day-to-day business, and they should be aware of it. It's just more just like adding a layer of, okay, we're doing this, but also be aware there's new agents out there that are going to be reviewing these things as well.
Yeah. On the employee piece, it really is important to include all employees in this and then also train them on how to interact with agents or regulators. I also like to bring up my golden rule when you're working with regulators, agents, inspections. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know. Do not be afraid. Sometimes people get so scared that they lie. And I understand. And so you just have to get through those nerves if you are scared and just remember it's okay to say that you don't know and I'm going to get that answer for you. And how soon do you need it? If they need it now, then you get on the phone and you find the answer. Can you email them the information or how's that going to work? Just to have that open conversation. Also, I do want to tap protecting sensitive information. I would say DEA readiness does not mean creating this one giant packet with people's social security numbers, their date of birth, their home addresses, their background checks, their access code, or security system details. You want to make sure that you try to keep that private, so keep sensitive information separately. Compliance does not mean oversharing. And let me tell you, when people get nervous, they overshare tremendously. Whatever they ask you, yes or no, give them exactly what they're asking for, and then don't go beyond that. Keep it very clean and simple. Next, we're going to talk about running a mock DEA walkthrough. I'll let Alex handle the mock inspection.
Yeah, and this is when ideally you get your compliance officer, whoever knows the state's rules the best, really to kind of lead this because, again, I mean, this is where the DEA is learning. It doesn't need to be too complex or different than what you're
Yeah.
already doing to prepare for compliance audits. You want to basically go through and maybe even trial run some interviews because what they'll do is they'll go to the frontline employees and they'll ask questions. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll ask, where do you get trained? Where does your business keep the training? Where's the information that you need to do your job? If you're looking for an answer to a question, where would you go, right? So you kind of want to prep your employees that, hey, there's going to be some questions, right? And you need to know where we keep our central truth. This comes back to the document control. Hey, you do need a central repository for where you keep your documents. Hard copies. It can be in different types of software, but they need to know, the employees need to be ready. This is where I find the central source of information, and they need to know too, just like you said, don't answer. If you don't know the answer, just say, I'll get back to you. That looks way better than forcing an answer. Yeah. But they need to know where to find the information. And one of the big things too is, again, inventory. Show me how you reconcile your inventory, right? This can be done so many different ways. You know, it can be done on a dry erase board. It's your virtual numbers versus your real numbers. You print out your inventory from your virtual metric or whatever it is, and how do you count? You should be able to demonstrate clearly how you do that process. And again, it's that central source of truth and information. Everybody, all departments need to be singing from that same hymn book, right? That here, this is where we go to when we have questions, especially about compliance. You know, and one of the things that I like to calm the employees down with is like, you don't need to have all of the information. You need to be able to reference it. That's the most important thing, because if they give you a question, the employee, they don't know the answer, well, oh, this is where we go. We go into this folder and we pull up and this is how we do it. That's what's most important. It's not like you got to cram before an exam. It is an open book test. But where's the book? That's the big question, and where to find it.
It's true. I work in over 20 plus states. I do not have every state regulation memorized. If I end up working in that state, then I'm like, okay, I go into that set of regulations for that state and I'm working through those regulations, but I can't rattle off thousands of rules and regulations for every state. On the piece with the document that you mentioned, the document management is also having a good document production plan. And
Absolutely. Yep.
yeah, making sure that you're maintaining things like request logs, any deadlines, document lists, submission dates, who the recipients are, delivery method, confirmation of delivery, and copy of the exact submission package. A lot of this information will be tracked in the inventory system. When you're wholesaling or using a point of sale software or a wholesaling platform, Metric doesn't track your wholesale. So you just want to make sure that you have a good document plan. And then I want to talk about the day of the visit and what medical cannabis operators should prepare for and how to be organized before they arrive. You want to confirm the date and time. Was it 48-hour notice, Alex?
That's that's what I'm hearing.
You want to make sure you confirm the date and time, confirm expected agents, confirm whether state regulators will attend or anybody from the state be there from the Cannabis Regulatory Authority during that inspection because they're trying to learn too. You want to notify the visit lead, who's the person that's going to be walking around with these 4 or 5 people for the next 5 to 6 hours. You want to notify senior management, and you want to notify compliance legal advisors as appropriate and prepare. You want to get together and have a private meeting and get organized with everybody on your team. And you want to have your document index ready. Alex, this is where that QMS and that master matrix document index that we always talk about. You want to make sure it's organized and ready to go. Whenever they ask for something, that you can easily go to that matrix and say, here it is.
Yeah.
It's right here. It's really important to be organized. When they arrive, you want to verify credentials, especially in today's day and age. We do know that regulator impersonations is the number one fraud in the cannabis industry. So there's nothing wrong with asking to verify credentials. I'm sure police officers, DEA, cannabis regulators, they're used to being asked that question. There's nothing wrong with asking it. You want to record the names and contact information or get their business card. You want to confirm their stated purpose. Have a knowledgeable manager accompany the team, or like I said, the compliance person or that lead person. And then you want to maintain a visitor log and also the communication log that we talked about earlier. Some tips during the visit is you want to be professional, cooperative. You want to answer questions accurately. You want to demonstrate actual operations. Don't guess. Document the areas visited. So I would carry a notebook around and I would take notes, notate important areas, anything that you might need to fix or get updated. So that way you can execute those items. I would note the photographs that they're taking. I would write down what they're actually taking pictures of because they are going to be taking photos, and track any kind of document requests that they give you. I don't know if there's anything else you might want to add to that.
Well, I mean, these are just humans, and they're learning, and I always like to just give them kind of that grace where it's like, hey, look, this is a hard job. They're bound by their rules and their checklist and what they can do, and just treat them like a human. Again,
just like the cannabis regulators.
I think you're right to say, don't necessarily try to be their friend. I mean, be friendly,
of course,
but give them some leniency because again, they're learning, and honestly, that could be where you strengthen a relationship, where it's like you're educating them as well, right? Because they're trying to learn this stuff. If you can be that kind of resource of helping them figure this out, that's probably a good move as well.
I would say, too, before the DEA leaves, make sure that you understand what documents are being requested, if they are requesting any documents from you. I would make sure you understand the format that's required. Is it a Word document? Is it PDF? Is this something that you're going to be doing through the portal? What's the deadline? Who should receive it? Once again, getting the point of contact, somebody's business card, making sure you have the right email address. How should they be securely transmitted? What are the next steps? And should the operator expect any kind of formal inspection here in the next 30 days, 3 months, 6 months, if that's something they're able to share with you? What is the anticipated timing? Are there additional forms or requirements? Is a mock audit or pre-inspection conference available? Is that something that they do? Is that something that the DEA provides? And if not, it doesn't hurt to ask. And I'm sure they're going to be giving you information before they leave, but it is important to ask questions, or that you have somebody that you can email and ask questions to after the inspection. I would say within 24 to 48 hours after the visit, you should make sure you debrief the staff, document what happened, record any questions asked, record the documents that requested, like I mentioned, confirm deadlines, create an action plan. You want to correct any identified gaps, if anything unidentified, Alex.
Oh, immediately, yeah. Usually they have tiers of violations. It'll be usually starting at minor, major, significant. Minor, usually the easy ones that you can button up. But anything, honestly, major or significant deficiencies or violations, you want to fix ASAP. These things might be, you need to fix this within 24 hours or a week. And like you said, document the deadlines and be able to respond. And we were talking about correspondence. It's important to have a composite notebook and just track the correspondence. Yeah. But everything I correspond with at a level like that, I'll make sure it's always email if you can. Email them so you can have that traceability of what communication went on. I like to even email that officer immediately. Thank you for coming, and tell them exactly what they told you. Here's what you told me. Here are the issues that you told me to fix. I'm going to fix those and then get back to you immediately once they're resolved. Wonderful. That's how I like to move forward with that at the end.
I agree. Here's what I heard. And if there's a timeline or deadline that they're giving you when they need it back by. Right. So, like I said, you want to identify those gaps and fix them. You want to correct them. You want to update your SOPs and retrain employees when necessary. Because I'm assuming once they get caught up with what they're in the middle of right now, coming to these operations, that they are eventually going to come back out again. Maybe they might want to come in again just because they're training these DEA agents and they need to go in facilities. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in a compliance inspection or an enforcement situation. I would say that initial visit definitely is not the end of the process, and the real compliance work begins when you take what you learned and start working on these gaps. I know a lot of operators are going to have gaps because they've never been under the scrutiny before. And I feel like the state regulators, they just cannot come in with these fine-tooth combs like I believe that the federal government can come in. They have the ability to come in with these fine-tooth combs compared to the state regulators. They just hired 5,000 new people for the DEA for these diversion agents. I would also say, if you're a medical cannabis operator listening and you have it prepared, I have 5 things that I think you guys could be working on. 1, making sure that you are designating your DEA visit lead. I can't stress enough how important that is. You want to start building your DEA specific compliance file and the document index that Alex talked about around your QMS. You are making sure that all your physical inventory is reconciled against your track and trace, purchasing, and sales records. You want to walk your facility, test your security system, test your employees, run these mock inspections for your management team. I would say, Alex, I know we said that maybe a mock inspection might be normal. I meet a lot of operators who don't do mock inspections. I would definitely practice some mock inspections, even if you've never done it before.
Yeah, walk through your systems. Make sure you know what's going on at minimum. It doesn't have to be a formal mock audit, but cross your T's, dot your I's, for sure.
Yeah, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave? Our point is not to scare anyone. We're just trying to provide context. We know smaller operators, they don't have the support teams that MSOs have. We thought it was really important to do this episode.
Give yourself and these agents some grace and patience. Everybody's trying to figure this out, right? But this is the time, I think, to shift from being reactive to proactive. This is the big
100.
shift in the industry. And this is where we've been waiting for a long time when the feds are coming in, and they're here. So state compliance, you need that foundationally, but this is where there's additional best practices, quality management systems, preparing for GMP. This is the time to really start getting your house in order. And this is the beginning of a long journey. Like you said, that first inspection isn't going to be what the second or third are going to be like. So learning from what they're doing, what your mistakes are, but just again, give yourself some time to know that this is a learning curve and the rest of the industry's in it with you. Hang tight. We're going to figure this out.
And if anyone needs help, please reach out. Alex and I are here to help people. I know this can be overwhelming. I think it is important to make sure to have the support that you need, and we're here for anyone that is looking for that support. I appreciate everyone listening. Alex, thanks for coming on.
Always fun with you, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
I know, I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone tuning in. And for those who want to stream the podcast, it is available on Spotify and Apple or wherever you like to listen. And then also, if you like video podcasts, please check out my YouTube channel, which is at Under the Microscope with Jenny. So thanks again, everyone. We'll see everybody on the next episode.